My name is Jade Montgomery, and I'm 35 years old. Have you ever been erased from your own family story? Last week, at my father's retirement gala, the pinnacle of his 30-year career as a prestigious school principal, I was literally kicked out of the VIP table in front of 200 guests. Not for causing a scene, not for being late, but for being just an elementary school teacher who apparently embarrassed the family. While his new stepdaughter, a corporate lawyer, took my seat and my inheritance position on a $5 million education fund board, I stood there, shaking, humiliated beyond words. But what happened next? When my quiet, unassuming husband stood up and walked to that microphone, the entire ballroom fell silent. What he revealed about who he really was changed everything in less than 60 seconds. The look on my father's face, the gasps from the crowd, and especially my stepmother's dropped champagne glass. I'll never forget it. Let me tell you how I got to that moment. Standing there, shaking with humiliation in front of 200 people who mattered in the education world. It started 3 weeks before the gala, when I received that golden invitation. At 35, I had spent my entire life chasing my father's approval. Robert Montgomery wasn't just any father. He was the Robert Montgomery, the legendary school principal who had transformed failing schools into academic powerhouses. His name was on awards, newspaper headlines, and now, apparently, a $5 million education fund. But here's what nobody at that gala knew. I was supposed to inherit that fund. It had been promised to me since I was 16, when my mother died and left me those handwritten notes about continuing the family's dedication to education. Those notes were still hidden in my bedroom drawer, proof of a promise that seemed to be disappearing. The invitation was worse than I expected. Printed in gold letters were the words, "Join us in celebrating Robert Montgomery's legacy and the announcement of the Montgomery Education Foundation's new leadership." New leadership? My stomach dropped. I had been preparing for this moment my whole career. I'd become a teacher specifically to honor my mother's memory and prove myself worthy of carrying on the family mission. That's when I realized what was happening. Jessica, my father's new stepdaughter, the corporate lawyer who had waltzed into our family 3 years ago when Robert married her mother, Linda. Jessica was everything I wasn't. Confident, wealthy, and completely uninterested in education until she realized there was money involved. "You can't keep doing this to yourself," Marcus had told me when I showed him the invitation. My husband was always the voice of reason, always calm, always in the background. "Doing what?" I'd asked. "Hoping he'll finally see you." The words stung because they were true. I had spent decades trying to prove myself to a man who seemed determined to look everywhere except at his own daughter. But I thought this gala would be different. I thought there was no way my father would publicly choose his stepdaughter over his own blood. I was wrong. And what happened next? Well, even Marcus surprised me that night. My quiet, unassuming husband, who I thought barely paid attention to family drama, was about to show everyone exactly who they were dealing with. The Grand View Hotel ballroom looked like something out of a fairy tale, if fairy tales were designed to make you feel small and insignificant. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks, casting rainbow patterns across tables covered in white silk and gold accents. 200 guests filled the room: superintendents, school board members, wealthy donors, and local politicians. Everyone who mattered in the education world was here to celebrate my father's 30-year career. Everyone except the person who mattered most to him. I smoothed down my black dress as Marcus and I entered the ballroom. I had chosen the dress carefully, professional but elegant, expensive enough to fit in but not flashy enough to draw attention. I wanted to blend into my father's world perfectly. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt like an outsider.
"Jade.
There you are." My stepmother Linda approached with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Don't you look nice?" The pause before nice said everything. Linda had a talent for making compliments feel like insults. "Thank you, Linda. The decorations are beautiful." Jessica handled all of that. She has such an eye for these things. Corporate events, you know. Much more complicated than what you're used to. There it was. The reminder that I was just an elementary school teacher, not someone who handled real business. Marcus stepped closer to me, his presence steadying me. "Where should we sit?" he asked quietly. "Oh, about that." Linda's smile became even more strained. "There's been a small change to the seating arrangements." My heart started racing. What kind of change? "Well, Jessica has been so involved in planning tonight, and she's been working closely with your father on the foundation transition. It just made sense for her to sit at the family table." The words hit me like a physical blow. The family table. My table. The seat I had occupied at every Montgomery family event since I was 5 years old. "I see." My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Where am I sitting?" Linda gestured vaguely toward the back of the room. There's a lovely table near the bar. You'll have a great view of everything. A great view of being excluded from my own family. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. He never did. That was Marcus, always calm, always in the background, always letting other people take center stage. As we made our way through the crowd, I caught glimpses of my father. Robert Montgomery commanded every room he entered, and tonight was no different. He stood tall and confident, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile warm and genuine as he greeted guests. But when his eyes met mine across the room, that warmth flickered and died. He gave me a polite nod, the kind of acknowledgement you'd give to any guest, and turned back to his conversation. That's when I saw her. Jessica Montgomery Chin, sitting in my chair at the family table, like she'd been there her whole life. She wore a stunning red dress that probably cost more than I made in a month, and she was laughing at something my father had whispered to her. They looked like a real father and daughter. Natural. Easy. Everything I had never been able to achieve despite 35 years of trying. You okay? Marcus asked, following my gaze. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to pretend this didn't matter, that I was above caring about seating arrangements and family politics. But watching Jessica lean in close to whisper something that made my father laugh, really laugh, the way he used to with my mother, I felt something break inside my chest.
No, y whispered.
I'm not okay at all. What happened next still makes my blood boil when I think about it. As Marcus and I stood near the bar, nursing our drinks and watching my father work the room like the celebrity he was, I kept telling myself things weren't as bad as they seemed. Maybe Linda had made a mistake about the seating. Maybe my father would notice I wasn't at the family table and fix it. I was still clinging to that hope when my father took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice boomed through the sound system, commanding instant attention. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate not just my retirement, but the future of education in our community. The crowd applauded, and I felt that familiar flutter of pride. Despite everything, Robert Montgomery was still my father. His accomplishments were part of my story, too. 30 years ago, I made a promise to this community, he continued, his voice filled with the passion that had made him legendary. A promise to put children first, to transform lives through education, and to build something lasting. I found myself nodding along, remembering all the nights he'd come home exhausted but fulfilled, telling my mother and me about the breakthrough with a struggling student or the new program he'd implemented. Tonight, I'm proud to announce the next chapter of that legacy. The Montgomery Education Foundation will continue this work under new leadership that represents the future of what education can be. My heart started racing. This was it. This was the moment I'd been preparing for my entire career. Please join me in welcoming the new chairwoman of the Montgomery Education Foundation, Jessica Montgomery Chin. The applause was thunderous, but all I could hear was the ringing in my ears. Jessica stood up from my seat at the family table, radiant in that red dress, and walked confidently toward the stage. She kissed my father on the cheek and took the microphone like she'd been born for this moment. Thank you, Robert, she said, her voice smooth and professional. I'm honored to carry forward the Montgomery legacy and bring the foundation into the modern corporate world. I felt like I was drowning. Around me, people were clapping and smiling, but I couldn't move.
Couldn't breathe.
This was supposed to be mine. My mother's legacy. My inheritance. My chance to finally prove myself worthy of the Montgomery name. Marcus's hand found mine, squeezing gently, but even his touch couldn't anchor me to reality. I watched Jessica outline her plans for modernizing the foundation, talking about corporate partnerships and efficiency metrics like education was just another business to optimize. Then came the final blow. I also want to thank my stepfather for seeing the potential in someone who understands both education and business, Jessica said, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found mine. Sometimes family means choosing the person best equipped to carry forward your vision, regardless of blood relation. The words hit me like a slap. She was looking directly at me when she said it, and that small smile on her lips told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just about the foundation. This was about erasing me completely. That's when Linda appeared beside us, as if she'd been waiting for this exact moment. Jade, dear, she said quietly, her voice dripping with false concern, I think it might be best if you and Marcus found somewhere else to stand. You're blocking the view for the other guests. I looked around, confused. We weren't blocking anyone. We were standing to the side, barely visible to most of the crowd.
I'm sorry.
I managed to whisper. Well, it's just that some of the board members have mentioned how out of place you look back here. Maybe you'd be more comfortable outside? Get some fresh air? The message was clear. I was being asked to leave. At my own father's retirement gala. In front of 200 people who knew exactly who I was. I looked toward the stage where my father was beaming with pride at Jessica, then back at Linda's expectant face. Marcus was watching me, waiting to see what I would do. For 35 years, I had swallowed my pride, accepted the scraps, and convinced myself that someday my father would see my worth. But standing there, shaking with humiliation as whispers started spreading through the crowd, I realized that someday would never come. Have you ever had a moment where everything you believed about yourself just shattered? That's what happened as I stood there, feeling the eyes of 200 people burning into me. Some looked confused. After all, I was Robert Montgomery's daughter. Others looked embarrassed for me. But the worst were the ones who looked satisfied, like they'd been waiting for this moment. Jade, Linda pressed, her voice getting firmer. I really think.
No.
The word came out stronger than I expected. I'm not leaving. Linda's fake smile faltered. Excuse me? This is my father's retirement party. I have every right to be here. Of course you do, dear, Linda said, her voice patronizing. But perhaps you could just step outside for a moment? Jessica is about to announce some very important partnerships and… What partnerships? I interrupted. The question hung in the air, and Linda's expression shifted. She looked uncomfortable now, like I'd asked something I wasn't supposed to know about. Well, the foundation has been working with several corporations to expand our reach, she said carefully. Jessica has been instrumental in securing these relationships. What corporations? Jade, this really isn't the time. Hamilton Industries. Jessica's voice suddenly boomed from the stage, as if she'd heard our conversation from across the room. Thanks to their incredible $5 million commitment, we'll be able to triple our impact in the next year. Hamilton Industries. I'd never heard of them, but the crowd erupted in impressed murmurs. $5 million was serious money, more than enough to make everyone forget about the awkwardness of my presence. I turned to Marcus, expecting to see the same confused expression I felt on my face. Instead, I saw something I'd never seen before. Marcus looked angry. Not just annoyed or uncomfortable, but genuinely furious. His jaw was clenched, his hands balled into fists, and his eyes were fixed on Jessica with an intensity that made me step back. Marcus. I whispered. What's wrong? He didn't answer. He was staring at Jessica like she'd just declared war on everything he cared about. Furthermore, Jessica continued from the stage. Hamilton Industries has agreed to provide ongoing mentorship and guidance to ensure the foundation operates with maximum efficiency and impact. That's when something clicked. The way Marcus was reacting, the timing of this announcement, the fact that Linda seemed nervous about discussing the partnerships. Do you know Hamilton Industries? Asked Marcus quietly. He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes made my heart skip. There was something there I'd never seen before. Power, authority, and something that looked almost like… guilt? Marcus. I pressed. Before he could answer, my father's voice cut through the crowd noise. I see we have someone in the back who seems to have something to say, Robert called out, his tone carrying that principal authority that had intimidated students and parents for 30 years. Jade, did you have a question about the foundation's new direction? Every head in the ballroom turned toward me. 200 pairs of eyes, waiting to see what the rejected daughter would do next. I felt my face burn with embarrassment, my hands shake with a mixture of fury and fear. This was his final humiliation, calling me out in front of everyone, putting me on the spot when he knew I had no power, no standing, no way to challenge what was happening. Actually, Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible, I do have something to say. I turned to stare at him. Marcus never spoke up in public. He hated being the center of attention, avoided confrontation at all costs, and had sat silently through 8 years of Montgomery family drama without saying a word. But something had changed. He was standing straighter now, his shoulders back, his expression completely calm. The anger was gone, replaced by something that looked almost dangerous. Marcus, you don't have to, I started. Yes, he said, his eyes never leaving the stage. I do. And then, to my complete shock, my quiet, unassuming husband began walking toward the front of the ballroom. Time seemed to slow down as Marcus walked through the crowd. Every conversation stopped. Every champagne glass froze halfway to someone's lips. 200 people watched this man they'd barely noticed all evening make his way toward the stage with a kind of confidence that commanded attention. I followed a few steps behind, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. What was Marcus doing? He'd never done anything like this before. He avoided family drama, stayed in the background, let other people have the spotlight. But watching him move through that crowd, I realized I'd been wrong about my husband. This wasn't the walk of someone uncomfortable with attention. This was the walk of someone who owned every room he entered. Excuse me, Jessica said from the stage, her voice tight with irritation. I'm not sure what you think you're doing, but this is a private event. Marcus didn't respond. He just kept walking, and something about his silence was more intimidating than any words could have been. My father stepped forward, his principal voice booming across the ballroom. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your seat. That's when Marcus finally spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room without needing the microphone. My name is Marcus Hamilton. The name hung in the air for a moment before the whispers started. Hamilton? Like Hamilton Industries? The company that had just committed $5 million to the foundation? Jessica's face went pale. My father's confident expression wavered. Linda, who had been so eager to get rid of me moments before, looked like she might faint. Marcus continued walking until he reached the base of the stage, then turned to face the crowd. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, measured, and absolutely deadly. I believe you've been discussing my company. The silence in that ballroom was deafening. I could see people pulling out their phones, probably Googling Marcus Hamilton Industries as fast as their fingers could type. My father cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. Mr. Hamilton, I wasn't aware you would be joining us tonight. If you had known, Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through my father's words like a knife, you might have treated my wife with the respect she deserves. My wife. He just claimed me in front of everyone, and the way he said it made it clear that disrespecting me was the same as disrespecting him. Jessica fumbled with the microphone, trying to say something, but Marcus held up one hand, and she fell silent. That small gesture told me everything I needed to know about who really had the power in this room. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus said, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the ballroom, I think it's time you learn the truth about who's really been funding your programs. And that's when my quiet, unassuming husband completely destroyed everything my father had built. For the past 5 years, Marcus continued, his voice carrying to every corner of that silent ballroom, Hamilton Industries has been the anonymous donor funding 60% of this district's programs. You could have heard a pin drop. I watched my father's face go from confusion to shock to something that looked like terror. The new computer lab at Jefferson Elementary? That was us. The reading program that helped improve test scores district-wide? Also us. The scholarships that sent 30 kids to college last year? Every single one came from Hamilton Industries. Jessica was gripping the microphone so tightly her knuckles had turned white. That's impossible. We would have known. Would you? Marcus asked, and there was something almost amused in his tone. Because according to my records, you've been taking credit for donations that came through shell companies and anonymous trusts for years. He pulled out his phone and held it up. I have every receipt, every bank transfer, every email trail showing exactly where that money came from. And here's the interesting part. None of it was ever supposed to go through the Montgomery Foundation. My father finally found his voice. I don't understand. If you're saying you've been donating to our schools, why? Because, Marcus interrupted, I was donating to support the teachers and students. I never intended to fund a vanity project for people who think education is just another business opportunity. The crowd was murmuring now, people turning to each other with confused expressions. But I was still trying to wrap my head around what I was hearing. Marcus, my quiet, stay-at-home husband, owned a company worth millions? Had been secretly funding my father's district for years? Furthermore, Marcus continued, the $5 million commitment to the Montgomery Foundation that was just announced? That was never approved by me or my board. In fact, we've never even been contacted by anyone claiming to represent this foundation. Jessica's face had gone completely white. That's not, we had meetings. Linda, tell them about the meetings. But Linda was nowhere to be found. I looked around and realized she had disappeared entirely, probably slipping out the back when she realized what was about to happen. There were no meetings, Marcus said calmly, because Hamilton Industries doesn't partner with organizations that treat educators with disrespect. We certainly don't fund foundations run by people who think an elementary school teacher isn't worthy of basic human decency. That's when he turned to look directly at me, and the expression on his face made my heart stop. There was love there and pride, and something that looked like an apology. My wife has spent 8 years trying to earn the approval of people who were never going to see her worth, he said, his voice softer now but still carrying to every person in that room. She's dedicated her life to teaching, to making a difference in children's lives, to carrying on her mother's legacy of putting education first. I felt tears starting to blur my vision. Marcus had been watching. All those years, I thought he didn't understand how much my family's rejection hurt. He'd been seeing everything. And while she was working 60-hour weeks for a salary that barely covers her student loans, I watched her family treat her like she was an embarrassment. Like choosing to be a teacher instead of chasing money made her less valuable. My father tried to speak. Now wait just a minute. No, Marcus said, and the authority in his voice silenced my father completely. You wait. You had 30 years to see what an incredible daughter you have. 30 years to support her, to value her, to treat her like she mattered. Instead, you chose to publicly humiliate her at what should have been a celebration of everything she's worked toward. He turned back to the crowd, and when he spoke again, his voice was businesslike and final. Effective immediately, Hamilton Industries is withdrawing all funding from any program associated with Robert Montgomery or the Montgomery Foundation. Our 5-year commitment to this district ends today. The gasps were audible now. 5 years of funding, 60% of their programs. Marcus was essentially defunding half the district with a few sentences. However, he continued, and I saw a small smile play at the corners of his mouth. I'm pleased to announce the creation of the Sarah Montgomery Memorial Teaching Excellence Foundation, named after my wife's mother. My breath caught. My mother's name. He was honoring my mother. This foundation will provide direct support to teachers, with no administrative overhead and no corporate partnerships. Just teachers helping teachers, the way education was always meant to work. He turned to me then, extending his hand like he was asking me to dance. Jade, would you like to tell everyone about our new foundation? I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at Marcus's outstretched hand. Around us, 200 people waited to see what I would do. My father looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 5 minutes. Jessica was clutching the microphone like it was the only thing keeping her upright. And my husband, this man I thought I knew, was offering me everything I'd ever dreamed of. I took his hand. The moment our fingers touched, I felt something shift inside me. Not just power, though that was part of it. It was like I was finally becoming the person I was always meant to be. Marcus helped me up onto the stage, and suddenly I was looking out at the same crowd that had watched my humiliation just minutes before. But everything was different now. They weren't looking at me with pity or embarrassment. They were looking at me with respect. Thank you, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jade Montgomery. I've been teaching elementary school in this district for 12 years. A few teachers in the crowd nodded at me encouragingly. I recognized Mrs. Patterson from the 3rd grade team, Mr. Rodriguez from the art department. My people. The ones who understood what this work really meant. My mother, Sarah Montgomery, taught in this district for 23 years before she died. She used to tell me that teaching wasn't just a job, it was a calling. A chance to change lives, one child at a time. I looked directly at my father as I spoke. She also taught me that real legacy isn't about buildings with your name on them or foundations that benefit corporations. It's about the students whose lives you touch, the teachers you support, and the community you serve. My father opened his mouth to say something, but I kept talking. The Sarah Montgomery Memorial Teaching Excellence Foundation will provide direct grants to teachers for classroom supplies, professional development, and student enrichment programs. No administrative fees, no corporate partnerships, no strings attached. The teachers in the audience started clapping, and the sound grew until most of the room was applauding. But not everyone. I could see the school board members looking concerned, probably calculating how much money they were about to lose. We'll also provide emergency assistance to teachers facing financial hardship because apparently it needs to be said. Educators shouldn't have to choose between paying their bills and buying supplies for their students. More applause, louder this time. Marcus squeezed my hand, and I realized he was as proud of me as I'd always wanted my father to be. But most importantly, I continued, this foundation will be run by teachers for teachers. Not by people who think education is just another industry to optimize. That was aimed directly at Jessica, and she knew it. She'd gone from confident corporate leader to looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Now, I said, turning to address the entire room, I know some of you are probably wondering what this means for the programs currently funded by Hamilton Industries. The room went quiet again. This was the practical question everyone was thinking about but afraid to ask. Any program that directly benefits students and teachers will continue to receive support, Marcus said, stepping closer to the microphone. But we'll be working directly with educators to determine how that money is used. No more anonymous donations that get funneled through foundations where teachers never see the benefit. I saw several superintendents and board members shift uncomfortably. They were probably thinking about all the administrative costs that usually came out of donations before any money reached actual classrooms. What about the Montgomery Foundation? Someone called out from the crowd. Marcus and I exchanged a look. This was the moment of truth. The Montgomery Foundation can continue to exist, I said carefully, but it will do so without any support from Hamilton Industries. If Jessica believes she can fund education programs through corporate partnerships and efficiency metrics, she's welcome to try. Jessica finally found her voice. This is completely unprofessional. You can't just. Actually, Marcus interrupted, we can. Hamilton Industries is a private company, and we choose our partnerships based on our values. Organizations that publicly humiliate dedicated educators don't align with those values. The message was clear. The Montgomery family had made their choice when they decided Jessica was more valuable than me. Now they would live with the consequences. The rest of that evening passed in a blur of handshakes, congratulations, and shocked whispers. Teachers approached me with tears in their eyes, thanking me for finally giving them a voice. Board members tried to salvage relationships with Marcus, suddenly realizing how much power they'd just lost. But the moment that will stay with me forever was when my father finally worked up the courage to approach us. Marcus and I were talking with a group of elementary teachers when I felt someone tap my shoulder. I turned around to find Robert Montgomery standing there, looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen him. "Jade," he said quietly, "could we talk?" The teachers around us seemed to sense the tension and drifted away, leaving just the three of us standing in the middle of the ballroom that had witnessed my humiliation and transformation in the span of one evening. "What would you like to talk about, Dad?" I asked, and I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a nervous student called to the principal's office. I think there may have been some misunderstandings tonight." "Misunderstandings?" I repeated. "About the foundation leadership, about the seating arrangements." I didn't realize how it would look. Marcus started to say something, but I squeezed his arm gently. This was my conversation to have. "You didn't realize how it would look to publicly choose your stepdaughter over your actual daughter? You didn't realize how it would feel for me to be asked to leave my own father's retirement party." "That wasn't. Jessica was just more qualified for the business side of things." "The business side of education?" I asked. "Dad, do you even remember why you became a principal?" He was quiet for a long moment. Around us, the party was winding down, guests gathering their coats and saying their goodbyes. But we stood there in our own little bubble of 35 years of complicated history. "I remember," he said finally. "I became a principal because I wanted to make a difference. Because I believed education could change lives. And somewhere along the way, you forgot that teachers are the ones actually changing those lives," I said. "You got so caught up in the prestige and the politics that you forgot what really matters." "I never forgot." "You forgot me," I interrupted, and my voice cracked slightly. "You forgot that your daughter chose to be a teacher because she believed in the same things you used to believe in. You forgot that Mom's dream was for me to carry on her legacy, not for some corporate lawyer to turn education into a business opportunity." My father looked like I had slapped him. "Jade, I never meant." "It doesn't matter what you meant," I said, and I realized I meant it. "What matters is what you did. And what you did was make it very clear where your priorities are." I looked around the ballroom one more time. At Jessica huddled in the corner with her phone, probably trying to figure out how to salvage her foundation. At the teachers still buzzing with excitement about our announcement. At Marcus, who had just turned my entire world upside down in the most incredible way possible. "The Sarah Montgomery Memorial Foundation will officially launch next month," I told my father. "Every teacher in this district will know they have somewhere to turn when they need support. Every student will benefit from programs designed by people who actually understand education." I paused, letting that sink in. You spent 30 years building a reputation in this community. But reputations can change pretty quickly when people realize what you really value. My father opened his mouth to respond, but I was already walking away. Marcus fell into step beside me as we headed toward the exit. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Hamilton?" he asked quietly. "Mrs. Hamilton." I liked the sound of that. "Actually," I said, "I think I'm ready to start over." The car ride home was completely silent, but it wasn't the comfortable, quiet Marcus and I usually shared. This was the silence of two people who suddenly realized they didn't know each other at all. When we finally pulled into our driveway, our modest little house that I now realized was probably worth pocket change to my husband, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Hamilton Industries," I said, staring straight ahead. "How long?" Marcus turned off the engine but didn't move to get out. 12 years. 12 years. I let that sink in. "We've been married for 8 years, Marcus. You built a multi-million-dollar company and never thought to mention it." He was quiet for so long I wondered if he was going to answer at all. "Do you remember our third date?" he finally asked. The question caught me off guard. "What does that have to do with?" "You told me about your father. About how he judged everyone by their career, their income, their status. You said you were tired of people only seeing dollar signs when they looked at relationships." I did remember that conversation. We'd been at that little coffee shop downtown, and I'd been venting about another awkward family dinner where my father had spent the entire evening talking to Jessica about corporate law while barely acknowledging my presence. I fell in love with a woman who chose teaching because she wanted to make a difference, Marcus continued. Not because it paid well, not because it impressed people, but because she believed education could change the world. If I had told you about Hamilton Industries on our fourth date, would you have seen me the same way? The honest answer was no. I probably would have wondered if he was slumming it with the poor teacher, or if he saw me as some kind of charity case. But 8 years, Marcus. We've been married for 8 years, and you let me struggle. You watched me stress about student loan payments and grocery bills while you were secretly funding half the school district. I never let you struggle, he said quietly. Have you ever wondered why your student loans were forgiven 3 years ago? Why our mortgage payment is so low? Why you always seem to win those random teacher grant lotteries? My stomach dropped. Those weren't random, were they? The Hamilton Foundation has been quietly supporting you for years. Not because you're my wife, but because you're exactly the kind of teacher we were created to help. I sat back in my seat, trying to process this. Every financial break I'd thought I'd earned, every grant I'd celebrated as validation of my hard work, it had all been Marcus. I wanted you to feel successful on your own terms, he said. I wanted your victories to be real. But they weren't real, were they? They were all you. Marcus finally turned to look at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Vulnerability. Your impact on your students was real. Your dedication was real. Your mother would be proud of the teacher you became, with or without my help. I just made sure you didn't have to choose between changing lives and paying bills. We sat there in our driveway, in this house that I now realized was probably the smallest property my husband owned, and I tried to figure out how I felt about learning that my entire adult life had been subsidized by a man I thought I knew. What happens now? I asked. Now, Marcus said, we build something together. As partners. No more secrets. No more secrets, I agreed. But as we walked into our house, I couldn't help wondering what other surprises were waiting for me. I woke up the next morning to my phone buzzing nonstop with notifications. Text messages, missed calls, social media alerts. It was like the entire world had discovered my existence overnight. Marcus was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop and 3 different phones, all of which seemed to be ringing constantly. Morning, he said without looking up. Coffee's fresh. You might want to sit down before you check your messages. I poured myself a cup and settled into my usual chair, then made the mistake of opening my phone. The first text was from my principal. Jade, please call me as soon as possible. The district office has been fielding media calls all morning. The second was from Mrs. Patterson. Girl, you're famous. Channel 7 wants to interview you. But it was the third one that made my blood run cold. It was from Jessica. You have no idea what you've done. This isn't over. Marcus, I said slowly, exactly how big is Hamilton Industries? He finally looked up from his laptop. Big enough that when the CEO's wife gets publicly humiliated by her family, it makes national news. He turned his laptop screen toward me, and I nearly dropped my coffee. There, on the front page of the business section, was a headline that read, Tech billionaire destroys father-in-law's legacy to defend teacher wife. Billionaire. My husband was a billionaire. How many articles? I asked weakly. 17 so far. CNN wants an interview. So does Forbes. The Today Show called an hour ago. I stared at the screen, reading the first few paragraphs of the article. It painted me as the humble teacher who had been secretly married to one of the most powerful men in tech, and my father as the arrogant administrator who had made the mistake of crossing the wrong family. They're calling it the most expensive family feud in education history, Marcus said. Apparently, withdrawing funding from the district is going to cost them about $12 million over the next 3 years. $12 million. My father's pride had cost his district $12 million. What about Jessica's foundation? I asked. Marcus's expression darkened. That's where it gets interesting. Turns out Jessica has been promising donations from Hamilton Industries to multiple organizations over the past 6 months. None of those promises were authorized by us. What does that mean? It means she's been selling something she didn't own. The Montgomery Foundation promised several schools new computer labs, updated libraries, and expanded arts programs based on funding that was never going to materialize. I felt sick. Those schools are going to be devastated. Not necessarily, Marcus said, and I caught a glimpse of the businessman he really was. Jessica Montgomery Chen just committed fraud using my company's name. That gives us several legal options. Before I could ask what he meant by that, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my father's number. I looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. Hello, Dad.
Jade.
His voice sounded strained, exhausted. We need to talk. I think we said everything we needed to say last night. The district is in crisis. Do you understand that? $12 million, Jade. Programs are going to be cut. Teachers are going to lose their jobs. I felt a flash of anger. Even now, even after everything, he was trying to manipulate me. Those programs were funded by my husband's company, Dad. The same husband whose wife you humiliated in front of 200 people. If the district is in crisis, maybe you should think about why Hamilton Industries decided we weren't worth supporting anymore. This isn't about you and me. This is about innocent children and teachers who are going to suffer because of this tantrum. Tantrum. He was calling my husband's decision to stop funding people who treated educators like garbage a tantrum. You know what, Dad? You're right. This is about teachers and children. Which is why the Sarah Montgomery Memorial Foundation is going to make sure every single program that actually benefits students continues to exist. What are you talking about? I looked at Marcus, who was watching me with something that looked like pride. I'm talking about making sure the teachers and students in this district get the support they deserve, with or without the Montgomery name attached to it. Jade, you can't just. Watch me, I said, and hung up. Marcus was smiling now. Ready to change the world, Mrs. Hamilton? Let's do it. 3 days later, Jessica made her move. I was in my classroom, trying to focus on lesson plans while ignoring the reporters who kept calling the school, when my principal knocked on my door. Jade, you need to see this, Mrs. Rodriguez said, holding up her phone. The screen showed a live news conference. Jessica stood behind a podium, looking polished and professional in a navy blue suit, with my father beside her and several official-looking people I didn't recognize. Thank you all for coming, Jessica was saying. I'm here today to address the serious allegations that have been made against the Montgomery Education Foundation and to set the record straight about what really happened at Saturday's event. I felt my stomach clench. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to be good. The truth is, Jessica continued, Hamilton Industries has been using anonymous donations to gain influence over our school district for years. When they realized they couldn't control the direction of our foundation, they orchestrated a public attack designed to discredit our work. Oh, she did not just, Mrs. Rodriguez started, but I held up my hand to keep listening. Marcus Hamilton married into the Montgomery family specifically to gain access to our educational networks, Jessica claimed. When his wife was passed over for a leadership position, a decision made purely on qualifications, he used his wealth to humiliate a respected educator and throw our entire district into chaos. The lies were so outrageous I almost laughed. Almost. Furthermore, Jessica said, we have evidence that several of the grants awarded to individual teachers over the past few years were part of a systematic attempt to buy influence within our schools. That's when I saw red. She was talking about the grants that had helped me buy supplies for my students, the professional development opportunities that had made me a better teacher. She was twisting Marcus's generosity into something sinister.
My phone rang.
Marcus, are you watching this? He asked without preamble. Unfortunately. Good. Because I want you to see what we're dealing with before I destroy her. His tone was completely calm, which somehow made it more intimidating. What are you going to do? Remember when I mentioned that Jessica committed fraud using Hamilton Industries' name? We've spent the past 3 days documenting every false promise she made, every dollar she claimed was coming from us, every school she lied to. On the TV, Jessica was taking questions from reporters. Someone asked about the $5 million commitment she had announced at the gala. That commitment was made in good faith based on verbal agreements with Hamilton Industries representatives, she said smoothly. We're currently pursuing legal action to enforce those agreements. Marcus laughed, actually laughed. She's doubling down. This is going to be even easier than I thought. What do you mean? She just claimed on live television that Hamilton Industries made verbal agreements to donate $5 million. That's going to be very interesting when we release the recordings. What recordings? The recordings of every phone call, every meeting, every interaction Hamilton Industries has had with anyone connected to the Montgomery Foundation over the past 5 years. Spoiler alert, there weren't any. I watched Jessica field more questions, spinning elaborate explanations about corporate partnerships and shared visions for educational excellence. She was good at this, I had to admit. She sounded convincing, professional, reasonable. She's making us look like the bad guys, I said.
For now.
But reputations built on lies don't last long when people start asking for proof. What about my father? He's standing right there supporting her. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Your father made his choice, Jade. He chose protecting his reputation over supporting his daughter. Now he gets to live with the consequences of that choice. On the screen, the press conference was wrapping up. Jessica promised that the Montgomery Foundation would continue its important work despite attacks from outside interests and assured everyone that the district students would not suffer because of corporate bullying. When do we respond? I asked. Tomorrow morning. And Jade? This time, we're not just defending ourselves. We're going on offense. The next morning, Marcus held his own press conference. Unlike Jessica's formal setup with multiple officials and a professional backdrop, Marcus chose to meet reporters in the lobby of Hamilton Industries headquarters. It was a power move, bringing the media to his territory, surrounded by the evidence of his actual success. I stood beside him, wearing my best professional dress, but still looking like exactly what I was, a teacher who had stumbled into a corporate war. Thank you all for coming, Marcus began. Yesterday, you heard some serious allegations about Hamilton Industries and our relationship with the Montgomery Education Foundation. Today, I'm here to provide facts. He gestured to a table beside the podium where several thick folders sat waiting. These folders contain every document related to Hamilton Industries' educational charitable giving over the past 5 years. Every donation, every grant, every interaction with school officials. You're welcome to examine all of it. A reporter raised her hand. Mr. Hamilton, Jessica Montgomery-Chin claims that your company made verbal commitments to support the Montgomery Foundation.
Can you respond to that?
I can do better than respond, Marcus said. I can prove it's false. He nodded to someone off camera, and suddenly a large screen behind him lit up with what looked like a call log. This is a complete record of every phone call made to or from Hamilton Industries over the past 6 months, Marcus explained. As you can see, there are no calls logged with anyone named Montgomery-Chin, Linda Montgomery, or Robert Montgomery. The screen changed to show email records, meeting calendars, even visitor logs from the Hamilton Industries building. No emails, no meetings, no visits. The first time anyone from my company had any contact with the Montgomery Foundation was Saturday night, when Ms. Montgomery-Chin announced a partnership that had never been discussed, negotiated, or approved. Another reporter spoke up. What about the claims that you married into the Montgomery family to gain influence over the school district? Marcus actually smiled at that one. I married Jade Montgomery 8 years ago because I fell in love with her. At that time, Hamilton Industries was a 2-person startup operating out of my garage. I had no money, no influence, and no reason to marry anyone for strategic purposes. He clicked to another screen, showing what looked like a timeline. Here's the actual chronology. I married Jade in 2015. Hamilton Industries didn't become profitable until 2017. We didn't begin our education charitable programs until 2018, and we didn't start donating to Jade's school district until 2019, for years after we were married, and only after Jade had been working there for 7 years. The reporters were scribbling notes frantically, but Marcus wasn't done. But here's what I find most interesting about yesterday's press conference, he continued. Ms. Montgomery-Chin claimed that Hamilton Industries has been trying to buy influence in the school district through teacher grants. She seemed to know an awful lot about grants that were supposed to be anonymous. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew where this was going. The only way she could have known about those specific grants was if someone with access to district financial records had been feeding her information. Someone in a position of authority who had been tracking which teachers received outside funding. The screen changed again, showing what looked like spreadsheets and email chains. These documents, obtained through a Freedom of Information request, show that Robert Montgomery has been monitoring and cataloging every grant received by teachers in his district for the past 3 years. He knew exactly which teachers were receiving Hamilton Industries support, and he shared that information with his stepdaughter. A murmur went through the crowd of reporters. This was getting bigger than just a family feud. So when Ms. Montgomery-Chin stood up yesterday and claimed that teacher grants were part of some conspiracy, Marcus continued, she was actually revealing that she and Robert Montgomery have been surveilling their own educators, tracking their funding sources, and building files on teachers who received private support for their classrooms. The implications of that hit me like a truck. My father had been watching me, tracking my grants, building a case against me for years. Furthermore, Marcus said, these same documents show that several teachers who received Hamilton Industries grants were subsequently passed over for promotions, committee appointments, and leadership opportunities within the district. He looked directly into the main camera. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here isn't a story about corporate influence in education. It's a story about administrators who have been punishing teachers for seeking outside support for their students. The questions came rapid fire after that, but I barely heard them. All I could think about was my father sitting in his office, keeping files on which teachers were getting help from outside sources and making sure they paid a price for it. Marcus squeezed my hand as he fielded questions about legal action, about the future of district funding, about what this meant for students. But I was thinking about something else entirely. How many other teachers had been hurt by this system? How many educators had been punished for trying to help their students? It was time to find out. Within 48 hours of Marcus's press conference, everything collapsed. The state education department launched an investigation into the district's grant tracking practices. 3 local newspapers ran exposés on administrative retaliation against teachers. And 17 educators came forward with stories of being punished for seeking outside funding for their classrooms. I was sitting in my empty classroom after school, grading papers and trying to process everything that had happened, when there was a knock on my door. My father stood in the doorway, looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen him. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I gestured to the student desk beside my chair. Watching Robert Montgomery fold his tall frame into a child-sized desk would have been funny under different circumstances. "The school board met today," he said without preamble. "They've asked for my resignation." I kept grading, not trusting myself to look at him. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you?" "Sorry, I mean..." I finally looked up. "Yes, Dad.
I am sorry.
I'm sorry that it came to this. I'm sorry that you chose your pride over your principles. And I'm sorry that it took destroying your career for you to realize what you'd become." He was quiet for a long moment, looking around my classroom, at the colorful bulletin boards, the student artwork, the inspirational posters that I'd bought with my own money because the district budget didn't cover non-essentials. "Your mother would be ashamed of me," he said finally. "Mom would be disappointed," I corrected. "But she'd also want you to do better, not just feel bad about it." "The foundation is finished," he continued. "Jessica's facing fraud charges. Linda's filed for divorce. And now everyone knows that I've been..." He trailed off. "Spying on teachers? Punishing educators for trying to help their students? Treating your daughter like an embarrassment." I never meant for it to go this far. I put down my pen and really looked at my father. This man who had been larger than life throughout my childhood, who had commanded respect from everyone he met, who had built a reputation as someone who put students first. "When did you stop caring about teaching?" I asked. "When did you become more interested in control than education?" He rubbed his face with both hands. "I don't know. Somewhere along the way, I started thinking that managing education was more important than supporting it. That oversight was the same as leadership." "And when did you decide that Jessica was more qualified to run an education foundation than your daughter, who's actually an educator?" That one hit him hard. I could see it in the way his shoulders sagged. She was so confident, so successful. When she talked about bringing business principles to education, it sounded modern, progressive, like we were evolving. "Dad, education isn't a business. Students aren't products. Teachers aren't just employees to be managed and monitored. We're professionals who dedicated our lives to something bigger than profit margins." "I know that now."
Do you?
"Because 3 days ago you stood beside Jessica while she called my husband's support for teachers a conspiracy. You backed her lies about grants that helped me buy books for kids whose families couldn't afford them." My father looked like I had physically struck him. "I was trying to protect the district's reputation." "Whose reputation were you really protecting, Dad? The district's or your own?" We sat there in the quiet of my classroom, surrounded by the evidence of what teaching really looked like. Student projects that had taken weeks to complete. Reading charts tracking individual progress. Thank you notes from parents whose children had learned to love learning. "What happens now?" he asked eventually. "Now you have to decide who you want to be," I said. "You can spend your retirement bitter about how unfairly you were treated, or you can use whatever time you have left to remember why you got into education in the first place." And us? What happens with us? I thought about that for a long moment. 8 days ago, I would have given anything for my father's approval. I would have forgiven him almost anything if he had just acknowledged my worth. But I was different now. I had seen what it felt like to be truly supported, to have someone believe in my value without conditions or expectations. "I don't know, Dad," I said honestly. "I think that depends on whether you can learn to see me as I actually am, instead of as a disappointment because I'm not what you wanted me to be." He nodded slowly, then stood up from the tiny desk. "Your mother would be proud of the teacher you became," he said quietly. "I should have told you that a long time ago." After he left, I sat in my classroom for another hour, not grading papers, just thinking about forgiveness and second chances and the difference between earning redemption and expecting it. 6 months later, I stood in front of the biggest crowd I'd ever addressed. The Sarah Montgomery Memorial Teaching Excellence Foundation's inaugural conference had drawn over 800 educators from across the state. Teachers, administrators, support staff, and education advocates filled the convention center ballroom, the same hotel where my humiliation had begun, though this time I was the one at the podium. When I became a teacher 12 years ago, my mother told me that education was about planting seeds in gardens you might never see bloom. Today, looking out at all of you, I think I'm finally understanding what she meant. The applause was warm and genuine, nothing like the polite clapping I'd endured at my father's gala. 6 months ago, I thought my value as an educator was determined by other people's approval. I thought I needed validation from administrators, recognition from my family, or acknowledgement from people who had never spent a day in a classroom. I could see Marcus in the front row, smiling encouragingly. Beside him sat Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Rodriguez, and 24 other teachers from my district who had become the Foundation's first advisory board. But I learned something important that night. The measure of a teacher isn't in the awards on their wall, or the size of their salary, or whether their family understands what they do. It's in the lives they touch, the minds they open, and the difference they make one student at a time. More applause, and I saw several people wiping their eyes. The Sarah Montgomery Foundation exists because teachers deserve support without strings attached. Because educators should never have to choose between their principals and their paychecks. And because every child deserves teachers who are valued, respected, and given the resources they need to succeed. Over the past 6 months, we had awarded grants to 247 teachers, funded classroom libraries in 18 schools, and provided emergency assistance to 52 educators facing financial hardship. But more importantly, we had created a network of teachers supporting teachers, sharing resources and ideas, and reminding each other why we chose this profession. Today, I'm proud to announce that Hamilton Industries has committed to making the Sarah Montgomery Foundation a permanent endowment. I continued. But we're not stopping there. I clicked to the next slide, showing a map of the United States with dozens of red dots. Next year, we're expanding nationwide. We're partnering with teacher organizations in 43 states to create regional foundations, all focused on direct support for educators. The crowd erupted in applause, and I had to wait for it to die down before continuing. Because every teacher in America deserves to feel valued. Every educator should have access to the resources they need. And every child should have teachers who are supported, respected, and empowered to do their best work. As I spoke, I thought about my father. He hadn't attended the conference, but he had sent a letter, his first communication with me since that day in my classroom. It was short, simple, and more honest than anything he'd said to me in years. Jade. Asterisk it read. Asterisk I'm proud of what you've built. Your mother would be too. I hope someday I'll earn the right to tell you that in person. Dad. Asterisk. I thought about Jessica too, who is facing trial for fraud and would likely never work in education again. Sometimes I felt sorry for her, but mostly I felt sorry for all the educators who had been hurt by systems that valued image over impact. When I was a little girl, I concluded, my mother used to say that teaching was the profession that creates all other professions. Today, thanks to all of you, we're making sure that profession gets the respect and support it deserves. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. 1 year later, I was back in my classroom when the knock came. It was the same knock I'd heard so many times before, hesitant, uncertain, carrying the weight of unfinished business. But this time, when I looked up, I saw something different in my father's face. He wasn't the defeated man who had sat in that tiny desk months ago. But he wasn't the arrogant administrator from the gala either. He looked humble.
Real. Jada.
Do you have a minute? I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the adult-sized chair I'd bought specifically for parent conferences. I've been volunteering, he said without preamble, at the Literacy Center downtown, working with adults who are learning to read. I raised an eyebrow. How's that going? Hard.
Humbling.
Amazing. He smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in years. Turns out, when you're not trying to manage people or evaluate them or improve their efficiency, teaching is actually pretty incredible. It is, I agreed. I met a woman last week, Maria. She's 43 years old, has 3 kids, works 2 jobs. She's been hiding the fact that she can't read for 20 years. When she finally sounded out her first complete sentence, he shook his head. I remembered why I became an educator in the first place. We sat quietly for a moment, and I realized that this might be the first real conversation my father and I had ever had about education. Not about test scores or budgets or administrative policies, but about the actual magic that happens when someone learns something new. I owe you an apology, he said. Not just for the gala, though that was inexcusable. For years of not seeing you, not valuing what you do, not understanding that you were already everything I should have wanted in a daughter. I felt tears starting, but I didn't try to stop them. I spent so long focused on achievements and recognition that I forgot the most important achievement of all, being a good father to an amazing daughter who is doing exactly what she was meant to do. Dad. Your foundation has helped over 3,000 teachers now, he continued. 3,000 educators who are better able to serve their students because you and Marcus decided to put teachers first. That's a legacy your mother would be proud of. That I'm proud of. I reached across the desk and took his hand. I love you, Dad. I always have. I just needed you to love the person I actually am, not the person you thought I should be. I do love who you are, he said. I love that you chose teaching. I love that you put students first. I love that you built something beautiful out of a terrible situation. And I love that you're my daughter, even when I didn't deserve to be your father. 6 months later, Robert Montgomery joined the Sarah Montgomery Foundation as a volunteer coordinator, helping retired educators find meaningful ways to support active teachers. He never asked for recognition or credit. He just showed up, did the work, and remembered what it felt like to put education first. And sometimes on quiet afternoons in my classroom, I'd look out at my students, reading, learning, growing, and think about seeds and gardens and the unexpected ways that forgiveness can bloom. My name is Jade Montgomery Hamilton, and I'm 36 years old. This is my story. Have you ever felt undervalued or overlooked by your own family? Drop a red heart in the comments if Jade's story resonated with you, and tell us about a time when someone finally saw your true worth. Smash that like button if you believe teachers deserve more respect and support. Subscribe and hit the bell for more incredible stories of ordinary people getting extraordinary revenge. What would you have done in Jade's situation? Comment below. We read every single one.